Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. And I'm George Binns. And this evening we're going to have another discussion about SEL, socially emotional learning. You guys with the acronyms are keeping me up on my toes. And the guests this evening are Dorothy Flaherty, the Assistant Superintendent of Schools, and Dr. Andre Morgan, the Director of, read that one right, Opportunity, Access, and Equity. You must have a business card. It's about 3 by 5.
It really
it's a good
is.
thing he has a short name.
It really is.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad to be back with you, George.
Yeah.
Thanks for an invitation.
Well, thanks for joining us this morning. And SEL is one of the new acronyms, the new buzzwords that's going around. And had a discussion with Laura Visnick about this summer from the perspective of the school committee. So from this perspective of the administration, what do you expect to get out of SEL? Or what do the students expect to get, should the students expect to get out of SEL?
Well, I think you said, it's the new buzzword or the new acronym, and that's really what it is an acronym that now has a title, but these are skills that we've been teaching in schools since I was there, since you were there, and it's really a more focused approach now so that we're intentionally teaching some of the skills that students will need to be successful in school while they're there, but also beyond for the rest of their life. So I think maybe looking at some of the skills that are considered under SEL makes it more understandable or manageable to the general population that are listening. And so when we're talking about SEL, I think you have the chart too. We're talking about teaching students how to have self-awareness, how to build relationship skills, how to be able to manage their own emotions when they're in a situation, how to build relationships themselves. I think that's a key piece that we're seeing now post-COVID, that when students were isolated or not spending as much time together or playing on sports teams or out on the playground, they weren't learning how to do those naturally social interaction skills that they learn, and now there's a lag. So we need to try to help to close those gaps. And then the other one is social awareness, which is how do I become empathetic? How am I aware of how you may be feeling? How my actions in a situation may be impacting other people? So really, social emotional learning is kind of a broad stroke, but it really is focusing on key skills that we all need for the rest of our lives.
Well, one of the things that I perceived from way back when, I used to didn't actually run with scissors, but I rode a bicycle without a helmet kind of thing. You'd knock on the door and say, "Hey, Johnny, can you come out and play today?" And that's how things happened. All of a sudden, I don't know what the transition point was, but things start to get organized. Well, they had Little League teams, and then you had the teams for just about every sport, and they were organized. And we just had this dust up a couple of months ago about Pete's Park, where the students, seniors in the high school, decided, we're going to have a 3-on-3 league. And also, wait a minute, you don't have a permit. We're going to call the cops. I mean, this transition, I don't understand how that's happening. And I guess what you're telling me is that you need to have this SEL program to sort of undo the kind of organization that all of a sudden the kids weren't responsible for what they were doing.
No, I think that we taught in schools even when I was in school, I was in 4th grade, and we had kindergarten students that might have had some special needs. One student was blind, one student had a wheelchair, and we became the helpers. We didn't know that we were teaching SEL, but they were building skills for me around social awareness, how to be empathetic, how to build relationships, because I got to be the buddy that helped them. Now it's just more of a concerted effort to make sure that we build those skills in all students. And I think some things have changed where years ago it might have been, out in the neighborhood or in the playground, but society changes, right? And so we have to adapt along with that and make sure that that students all have the skills they need. Some are going to be learning it at home, some may not, some may need extra help. So it's all part of being able to interact and be able to work in a collaborative environment. Things in the workforce are much more team-based and collaborative-based now than they were 30 or 40 years ago. So it's just evolving with what the skills are that our students will need to be productive citizens in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the market shifts, if you will, because I remember, going out into the neighborhood and participating in an array of different activities and not really noticing people's differences. And so I think as more discourses occurred across the nation, students and families are becoming more aware of the differences of people and their backgrounds and experiences. And I think we're at a place today where classrooms really have become a place where students are first exposed to differences in ideologies, differences in backgrounds, differences in belief systems. And to account for these differences, SEL is really a methodology that places all students on an equal footing for success.
Well, one of the things you just brought up about the kind of experience you had, and you get to the point, I guess, where they have different classes mixed together at different grades, where you get one student who is very good helping somebody else who is good, not so good in the subject, and vice versa. You get a reciprocity in there. And I think this is something that never really got taught or never really got displayed. And when I was going through school, you stayed in your seat, excuse me, and the teacher stood up at the front of the class and talked to you. And I think a lot of this collaborative kind of activity is a difference where, to the point you're making, the students get exposed to different students on a different basis. It's not like everybody sit quietly.
Well, times change, right? Like when that was what we called the 1900s, the early 1900s, is what we call the factory model of education,
Yeah.
right? Where the teacher stood at the front of the room, taught, everybody was sitting in rows, they did their independent work. But we were training and teaching people to be ready to go work in factories or management, and now we're training students to be involved in a global society, and so they need to have a different skill set.
Well, that brings up one of the points. I was doing the shows for the election campaign 2 cycles ago. One of the candidates for the school committee was talking about difficulty he had when he had intern students, and that they would be doing some exercise that he had put them to, some process that he was trying to get something done, and they would get a phone call or cell phone message or text message, and they'd stop what they're doing and they would work on the cell phone. And it was just this attitude of, well, the cell phone is what's really important, not the job that I've got. And I guess, how do you get that message across that, hey, if you're given a task to do, you're expected to do it and get it done. And your social life, that's after work.
And so I think that's part of the shift in education, if you will, is the evolution of technology. And because our society has become more technologically advanced, with more bells and whistles, if you will, it shifted the way that we do education. And so as a result, going back to Dr. Flaherty's comment about the factory model, we were doing education such that every student was getting the same thing at the same time and at the same place each day, like a factory model. But technology has forced us away from that kind of shift, from away from that kind of model, if you will, such that the same things that were done in a factory model type of concepts no longer work for every student. And so different students need different things. To your point a little more explicitly around how do you get students to transition, from their social life to a productive work environment, if you will. I think that's part of the SEL benefit, if you will, to help students to be more critical thinkers, to help students understand and rationalize what qualities and what characteristics are important for a job versus what are the things that you might focus on away from the job. And so that becomes a whole part of the education structure, if you will, how to teach students to be responsible citizens. And that includes responsible cell phone usage and also its abuses as well. And so SEL isn't just, a model that's kind of touchy-feely, if you will. It's a methodology that really has some short and long-term successes for students collectively in their academic life, in their personal lives, in their social lives, in their professional lives. And it's really a long-term concept.
So, like, one of the key components under SEL, there are 5 of them. We talked about 4. The 5th one is responsible decision making. And so, in that point, that's a good lesson for intern to learn, because they need to understand when it's okay to use their cell phone or to have personal interactions and when it isn't. And that could be different now depending on where you're doing your internship. Through COVID, one of the things that we've really moved, the whole society has moved to, is a more hybrid type workforce. So we've learned that you can be at home or you can be doing personal and productive with your work as well. So I think that technology is kind of changing that. But knowing what the expectations are for the situation you're in is part of the skills that we would teach under responsible decision making, that there are consequences. And if you're in an environment where your boss doesn't want you to have your cell phone out during the day and you take it out, well, then you face the consequence of maybe losing your job.
Yeah. Well, I think this has to start back in the classroom. And I follow a couple of different blogs on education on the net. And one of the comments keeps coming up about should you allow kids to have cell phones in class? And there was one gentleman who teaches in a parochial school in Chicago, and he says, no, we collect them at the beginning of the day, and you get your cell phone back at the end of the day. And there's a funny story about a professor stands up at the podium, and he's about to give his lecture, and you can see his students laid out in front of him with their laptops open, and they're basking in the glow of the screen. And this one guy down front, he's reading a newspaper. He says, what are you doing? He says, my cell phone, my computer broke. And you start to wonder that when they've got all these devices out and operating, do they really have the classwork on the screen, or are they playing games? And there's been exposés of different senates and congresses and different organizations that somebody goes around behind them and takes a photograph, and they're planning trips, they're playing games, they're playing solitaire. So it's not just something that the students are addicted to, or
it's the adults too.
It's the
Same
adults.
thing. We're in
So
meetings and people are
Really is.
multitasking. Or,
yeah, so multitasking might be a polite way to put it. Playing games is just, well, the other thing too is you get into one of these sessions and you're getting bored out of your gourd with the cure for insomnia that somebody is presenting. And what do? You know,
check your email. You check your,
Absolutely.
you know.
Well, you start
I
off,
think we've all probably been.
well, you start off, well, I'm wasting time here. I could do something productive. Take out
Yep.
your cell phone. Yeah.
Well, and the thing is you don't even have to do that anymore because the cell phone and your laptop are interchangeable. Right?
Yeah.
You don't have your laptop. You can do everything on your phone now that you used to need your laptop for,
Yeah.
and vice versa.
Yeah.
So,
And it's tough, honestly, because, electronic devices has its use in the classroom.
yeah.
For example, the type of device I use, has a calculator on it. And so in terms of math functions, I can do them with ease on my phone.
Yeah.
However, the phone can also be abusive and disruptive in a classroom setting as well. And so, what students are actually doing on the phone, unless we're actually looking at the phone, we can't necessarily answer that. But we do understand that there's a fine line that needs to be drawn. And so that's not just in classrooms here in Beverly, but that's in classrooms in every district and in every school across the nation and across
And I
the
think
globe.
you see that realization here as well, because we don't have cell phone usage in the elementary level. Middle school, it's supposed to be away. They're not supposed to have it out during the day. Now, that becomes more of an enforcement issue, right? And how they're going to do that. And I know the middle school is working really diligently right now about ideas of how to control the cell phone usage.
yeah.
But students also have anxiety now, as do many of us. If you leave your phone at home, do you just go to work for the day, or do you turn around and go home and get your phone?
Oh, yeah.
And so they're really working on how to make it only be productive use of a cell phone. And the high school, a little bit more, and that's going to be a little bit more independent based on the teacher, because kids can use their phones for academic purposes. But if they are not using it for an academic purpose, it should be put away. It shouldn't be out.
Well, there's another facet of the SEL that comes up, is that the interaction between students. And that leads very quickly to the age-old bullying issue. And it goes one step further, and the shooter in Texas was bullied as a kid growing up. And though nobody has said it, the implication is, well, that's what set him off, kind of thing. So I guess the question I have now is, how do you integrate this SEL and the concern that most schools have a problem with bullying, or kids just left aside, left out, and become loners that have a hard time adjusting?
Well, that's two of the big pieces of the framework, right? When we talk about social awareness and relationship building skills and being a good citizen, we want to be able to teach students, and we do it as early as kindergarten. The elementary school uses a program called Responsive Classroom, and that allows students to start to learn what their own emotions are, how to manage those, how to share with your teacher how you're feeling that day, because that could impact your ability to learn. But even as importantly, it helps them to build skills about working with other students, to understand how their actions, like name calling or sending a Instagram post that could hurt somebody's feelings, how their actions impact somebody else. And so that's a key piece of SEL. So it goes both ways. It's about the individual, but also how your actions and behaviors impact other people. And we have seen an increase of mean behaviors, sometimes escalating to bullying, but not always. Sometimes it's just one mean action that happens through social media, and the schools investigate it and follow up as well. And then we also have school adjustment counselors, guidance counselors, and we're going to be adding City Connects positions to the schools next year to work around that mental health and making sure that students get what they need for mental health supports.
And I think to add to that, George, some examples of SEL. The benefits of SEL is that, it allows students to be able to accept criticism and responsibility. It also helps students to be able to move on after a conflict. It helps students to be able to say no when they need to. It also enables students to be able to share their thoughts and ideas cohesively with others. And then it also promotes problem solving and critical thinking with students. And so all of those facets collectively build into the model that Dr. Flaherty is talking about, that enables our students to be better decision makers. When you're better decision makers, then better decision makers and purveyors of empathy, which is a core concept around SEL, then that begins to address the bullying issues that you brought to the table.
When you talk about self-awareness and self-management, one of the biggest keys of that is to be able to understand how you're feeling, or to know that you're not feeling right, and to be able to ask for help, or to go to somebody and say, this is happening, or I'm feeling this way, and then somebody can help work you through that, through problem solving, or getting you the social, emotional help that you need.
Way back when, Ella Fitzgerald sang a song, pretty famous at the time, of "Tain't what you say, it's the way how you do it," which is essentially walk the talk routine. Excuse me. I'm thinking of along the lines of it ain't what you say, it's the way how you say it.
Absolutely.
And being able to interpret the motivation behind a comment is extremely important. And a lot of jokes go down sideways because somebody didn't, what do you mean by that? Kind of thing. And you start out with a chip on your shoulder that if anybody mentions the wrong thing, all your bristles go up and it's ready to start a fight. So how do you get this kind of a message across in detail as opposed to a good idea?
Well, I think it also that point brings across how interconnected so much of learning is today. And because some of that is teaching digital literacy skills, which students need to know in order to be, as we said, a global citizen, right?
Yeah.
Because so much of it is happening through a device. And, we talk about, you make a good point that one of the things that technology did is it takes away the face-to-face, right?
Yeah.
So if you or I are in an argument, or if you're mad at me and we're sitting in the same room, I can pretty much read that on your face or in your body language. When you send me a text, I don't see any of that. So many times things are misconstrued or taken the wrong way because it's my perception of what came in versus what the other person's intention was. We talk about all the time, if you type in caps, does that mean that you're yelling at the person? If you use, 5 exclamation marks at the end of a comment versus 1, does that mean that, there's more intensity? No, it could just mean that somebody likes exclamation marks, so
Or the key stuck.
Right,
or the
right.
key stuck, absolutely. So do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and I think SEL has to be paired with teaching core values, and so that's not absent from the equation, if you will, but it's what helps us to get the messaging across in the most effective manner.
Well, you mentioned earlier about addressing kids and mean comments, mean activities, and again, getting ready for our discussion today, came across something called a Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines, which walks you through a series of steps on what do they say, what do they mean, who talked to who, and so forth. Now, does the school system use this, or do you have something similar?
I don't know what that one is particularly, but yes, we do follow a same, protocol. The assistant principals or our equity coordinators get training on how to investigate a complaint if it comes in. We also have our school adjustment counselors at the elementary, middle school, and guidance counsel. We even have school adjustment counselors
Yeah.
at the high school. And they would follow a threat assessment and be able to direct it in the way that it needed to go after the investigation.
So I keep coming back to this concept of bullying because this is what I pick up at the Y. I talk to different parents about different things, and I don't even have to ask, and they start expressing their concerns about it. And the situation that happened in Danvers with the hockey team, that's another school down on the South Shore that got into some strange football signals that were conceived to be anti-Semitic. So a lot of this stuff is going on. And every so often it bubble up to the surface and it make the papers. But what I'm concerned about is the stuff that it's not that bad, but it's enough to irritate. And you start to wonder, at what point does this set somebody off? And you get a very adverse reaction. And how is the classroom teacher be able to, first of all, identify a potential concern in a student, and then what can they do about it?
And so I think you really have to look at it from a couple of different levels. So any form of bullying is never acceptable, no matter how minor it's passed off to be. And so one of the things that we teach collectively, particularly, across the stream of our schools, is number one, if you experience bullying, or if you see bullying as a bystander, to speak up. So that's part of the core value, being able to use your voice to be able to stop this particular behavior and these actions. I think the other lens of that is how do you address it in the most productive way. And so when we really take a look at bullying, when you get down to it, and this is just across the scope of our experiences, it's usually done over difference. And so I mentioned a few minutes ago when we started the conversation that in many cases today's classrooms are exposing students as the differences that they're not familiar with and not equipped to handle. And so that becomes a part of the SEL model as well. So there's a number of things that we have in place to diffuse bullying. Dr. Flaherty talked about a few of them. We're also introducing the concept of restorative circles in our schools.
Say that again.
Restorative circles. And so they're student conversations where students are physically in circle formations, if you will. They're done at different times during the day, although I've seen them work a little better at the beginning of the day. They can be used as check-ins. They can be used as norm-setting venues, if you will. But it's an opportunity for all students to get on the same page. It's an opportunity for students to be able to use their voices to talk about differences and issues that they're having and experiencing. And we're finding that these are going a long way at mitigating some of those acts of bullying, if you will.
Andre's been doing some great work with our middle school and high school students around positive messaging, around that bystander piece, and we work with the little ones as well. If you see something, say something. If you see somebody being bullied or somebody's being mean or made a comment or worse than that, on social media, then come forward and share that information with a trusted adult. We hope that every student in our buildings has at least one trusted adult that they can go to and talk to or share information or ask questions. We are also, they have programs running at both schools for students to get involved in to help send positive messages about not being a bystander and about including people. And the message is getting out there, and one of the things we're proud about is right here at BevCam, right? Our students won an award for the video that they made around making sure that they got the message out that it's okay to accept help and to seek mental health assistance if you need it. That was a really great video.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think BevCam has done quite a bit of good work, but excuse me. Introducing the students to this kind of an environment, and how do you get a message out to a bigger audience routine? And unfortunately, we've run out of our half hour.
Oh,
And
that went so fast.
yeah, it does, and maybe we need to continue this discussion some other time, because there's an awful lot going on, and the schools are getting much more complicated. And I think one of the issues that keeps coming down is, hey, when I went to school, we didn't have all of this stuff. It was always reading, writing, and arithmetic, 3 R's, and that's all you ever saw. And now it's getting into
It's a
lot of other
complex
issues.
society
It is,
now.
and it's continually evolving.
And one of the issues, again, as I pick up on the blog, is that a lot of stuff is being done in schools that used to be done at home. And the home life is not the same as when I was growing up. So it's a different world, like I said. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And we'll have another talk about this. Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you.